Hi, my name is David Lee, and today I'm going to talk about bicep conditions and loops. So, as with many of my presentation, I like to start off with a use case from Contoso, and that will allow us to design and start thinking about the implementation details for this in bicep. So, the first requirement from Contoso is that they need two virtual networks created, um, a primary and a secondary one, which is a DRV net, and they do need it to be peered. Um, the other requirement is that any of the subnets, from the name, the IP range, the network security group, service endpoints needs to be managed via code, right? So infrastructure as code is what they really need. So nothing should be done from hand. It's all going to be done through code, done through the biceps. From a security perspective, they need to only allow HTTPS traffic from the office IP, as well as ensuring that everything should be tagged right with the purpose of the resource and the owner. So let's take a look at the network design of what the outcome or the output should look like, and that's going to help us kind of in our when we write the bicep code. This is going to help us write that in the right way. So as we can see here, Contoso has designed, um, there are two virtual network, and within each virtual network, there is actually three subnets. So there's a application gateway subnet, which is represented by the 10.0.0.0/24. Um, and the second one is an application specific subnet, which is the 10.0.10/24. And the third one is the DB subnet 10.0.20/24. They have a they have a disaster recovery specific virtual network in East US 2. So the primary one is going to be in Central US, but the secondary one is in East US 2. And this is really because of the way that in Azure regions are paired, and so that's why you really want to have your DR um, virtual network created in that paired region, which is the East US 2. Same thing, but it's the 172.0.0.0 kind of network location. So now with this in mind, let's go ahead and take a look at um, what we're gonna write when we are designing that bicep um, structure, right? So we're gonna try to represent the various components such as subnets into array, right? Because there's going to be a lot of code that is going to be repeated, right? And so we need to have an array structure, perhaps, to store the configuration details of the subnet because, right, they're the same across. Um, they're very similar, across two of the virtual networks, in terms of the network security group configuration, and a few other settings, right? Um, Obviously, they're in the network security group. Like the application gateway would allow HTTPS traffic, but the other network security group wouldn't, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna apply three different network security group, right? But only one of the network security group needs to allow for traffic coming from outside from the office location. So we're gonna do we're gonna apply the if else condition so that as a deployment is happening, we kind of take and see if this is the application gateway subnet, and then do the allow or not. Um, there's going to be a need to control parallel deployments, right? Because Um, if we do try to deploy resources and there's some dependencies, um, you know, we can't have that to happen. So there's going to be some syntax to try to control that. Let's look at how we're going to implement Bicep, which is really the same as last time, right? Where I had a previous presentation on an intro to Bicep around some of the key concepts, and I talked about, Azure PowerShell, CLI, DevOps pipeline deployment task, or a GitHub deployment action that helps us deploy our Bicep file. So without further ado, we're gonna go to start writing some code next. All right, we're gonna start writing some code, and I've created my deploy.bicep file. Um, some of the concepts that I'm going to talk about is also found on the Microsoft documentation site. So if you guys and this will actually be on the GitHub link that I'll also share, where you can find this link there, talking about iterative loops in Bicep. So let's go back to our code itself, and we're going to start off with defining some of the parameters. Um, and I've actually described parameters and a few other syntax key concepts in an intro to Bicep. So if you haven't seen that video, I'm going to also put a link, so you can feel free to reference that. But let's start with defining our parameters. So as with how I like to name my resources. I love to name my resources with some prefix, and that's why I always have this prefix called stack prefix variable. I'm also gonna always define environment, right? Because we could have dev, QA, stage, and production. So we do need to tag our resources, which means with the owner. And so which means we need to send in a stack owner parameter, and we also need to define a source IP, right? Because as we're defining our network security group, we need to allow traffic coming in from our office IP. So that's going to be a string as well. And we need to define two locations, which I'm going to set them up with Central US and East US 2. Central US. DR location would be East US 2. All right. So this is, although this is a parameter, so I can override it, but if I don't send anything in, it's going to be Central US and East US 2 for those two parameters. All right, so coming back to the naming convention that I like is when I name my resources, I like to concatenate the prefix with an environment. Oops. And close it. Cool. So this is what I'm going to name all my resources with using the stack name and tags. Let's see, we need to define stack dash name, and we're going to call it. So why is this? Platform networking. Let's see. Environment. Stack environment. And we got stack owner that we're going to pass in from parameter. Okay, so we've kind of defined our tags. subnets. Now, the next thing that we want to do is to start defining our subnets. So here I've defined an array, and this is actually a custom object, right, that I've defined. So let me actually take a quick look at why some of the colors are off. Oh, it's because I have not put in a single quote at the end of that parameter. All right, so everything, so all the colors looks right, like, you know, it wasn't originally the correct colors. All right, so we're gonna declare the first subnet, which is an app gateway subnet. I'm gonna specify my range .0/24, right? And this is coming from that design, that architecture document, or the architecture that we were looking at as PowerPoint earlier. So we don't have to guess. Yeah, so this is fine to be documented as code, right? Because now you know, if anybody does need to change some IP ranges or the names, right, it's all done through this configuration section. So prefix. I'm gonna be a little bit lazy actually and start to copy and paste, and we have another subnet 2. Right. So what we've just done is we've declared 3 subnets that are going to be used later on in our VNet, you know, and they're declared here. So let's say that there's a 4th or 5th subnet. You know, we're going to continue adding them here, and because we already defined some of the IP ranges, right? It's clear to us, you know, what we need to do next. What's the IP range that we need to define next? And it will automatically be applied to the virtual network, right, later on. And so, you know, nobody really needs to write any additional code other than kind of coming here and declaring the additional subnets. And that will be applied for both virtual network. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to define the VNet. I'm going to name my VNet. All right, so this is something that I should need to know already. Virtual networking. Oops, not virtual peering. It should be just virtual network with the version. I'm going to name, let's see. So I'm going to be a little bit explicit here and, you know, even give the region. I need to spell name correctly, right? And I need to give it a tag. I need to give it a location, and I can start defining properties, which, yep, address space is there, and I need to provide that prefix. All right, so n.0.0.0/16, and so now I should be able to, yep, now I can declare my subnet. So you know, I can't just do subnets, you know, using the variable here because there's actually configuration specific for subnet. But here's where we're going to start writing a loop, right? We're going to loop through the subnets that we've declared on line 16 to 32, and then, you know, start configuring actual subnets. So the first thing is subnet requires an array. So we're going to declare an array. We're going to say for subnet I, right? So this is the reference to the subnet in the array. So this is a reference to a single instance, and this is I is an index. It's a 0 index, so you should start with 0. We will get to 0, and then in subnet, and here is where you know, we can start declaring the subnet, right? So if we do control space, right, we start to, the IntelliSense start to help us see what's available, and I'm going to do subnet name first, right? So this is the name. So notice that the object verb, the array that I've declared here, there's no IntelliSense. So something to watch out for. And the next thing I'm going to do is declare the property, and there's address prefix, so subnet prefix. All right, so this is actually completed. We do need to reference this subnet later on when we start applying the network security groups. But what we've just done is, right, this is an array that we've declared. Here we're looping through each array and, you know, having that variable subnet and, you know, and then using the properties from that and kind of putting it in the right, setting it to the right context, right? So now that we've done that, we should create the DR VNet. Okay, so I'm just gonna again be lazy and East US2 DR. Okay, 172. And then everything else should be the same. And just kind of verifying the different configuration and looking good. So now I'm gonna do peering. Okay, so the first part of peering is I'm gonna peer from primary to DR VNet. So yep, this part is something that you should know, or, you know, look up. Virtual networks peering, I believe. Yes. Okay. So we need to give this a good name. Okay, so we're just gonna name it primary to DR peer, and the parent is going to be the primary VNet. Properties, and we're gonna allow virtual network access true. Right. So now we need to peer it to the DR VNet, and that should be the remote virtual network. And we need to provide an ID. So DR VNet dot ID. Great. So now we are going to start to peer it the other way around, and so DR to primary, in this case should be the primary VNet So we have peerings going both directions. Everything's good. And also it's just, we could also kind of declare arrays for this type of situation. So it's I think it's going to be a little bit harder just because there's references back to um, the VNet itself. But there could be creative ways to do that. All right, so now I'm going to start looking at the network security group. But before I do that, I am going to actually create the rules first, right? So I'm going to first declare a variable called allow HTTPS. And so, this in this kind of context, I am just declaring an object, but I'm thinking of applying this directly. And this also means I need to be familiar with the properties or the syntax for that security rule that I'm going to be applying on the network security group, right? And because I looked it up, so I'm just kind of coding from that perspective. In fact, why don't I just kind of copy that from somewhere, and here we go. We have that allow HTTPS traffic, right? And this will be applied on the application gateway subnet, right? So allowing HTTPS traffic from a source IP. The other thing that we need to do is if we go back and look at the documentation for application gateway, in terms of network security group, there is actually a documentation that says we need to allow incoming traffic from source as gateway, manager, service tag, and destination as any, with the right ports. It is actually used by the Azure infrastructure. So that's why we're going to create another network security group rule for that specific scenario. And what I've done is went ahead and created that allow application gateway v2 traffic is what I've created. And here you can see that following the documentation, putting gateway manager for the source address prefix and the source port range. And so this is really for that purpose. So now we're ready for declaring our network security groups. So I'm going to say resource nsg and Microsoft network security network security group. Network group security groups. Oh, I should have named this here. All right, now we have network security group. So for the network security group, we're going to declare an array. I'm sorry, we're going to use that array that we've created so that we can create corresponding network security group, specific to each of the subnets. So here we're going to directly declare an array for subnet in subnets. So just one quick note is in this case, I've declared an I index, but I don't need to if I don't need access to know what's the index. So I could have just used this syntax here. So again, we could refactor this out for the I because we are not actually using the index. All right, so just kind of continuing from there is we're gonna now declare the name, and so it will be nice to use subnet.name. I'm sorry, subnet.name here. Um, the one thing that we do maybe just to, as we look at resources, network security group resources, is defining whether it's primary or DR, and then doing the name for the subnets. I'm sorry, we already have the subnet name here, so we don't need to do that, and just say subnet NSG. Okay. So now we need to provide a location. It's going to be the primary location, tags, and properties. Okay, so security rules for each of the subnet. I'm gonna say, yeah. So this is where we kind of need to think about conditions, right? Because we're gonna apply these two rules only on the application gateway. So for condition, we can simply just say, kind of using the if else kind of condition. So if subnet name equal to app GW, app gateway, then we have to apply the rule, otherwise we don't. So I think it's gonna be allow HTTPS, allow app gateway v2. Right, so this is how we're kind of applying the rules, right? And it's conditional. So the expectation is this is only gonna be on the subnet for application gateway and not for the other two. Okay, so again, I'm gonna be lazy and do this. DR, maybe using DR location, but everything else should be fine. Okay, so this is where we will start to apply network security group to the subnet. Okay, and so we're gonna actually reference the subnet itself. Actually, we see that, and so here we can say for subnet in subnets. Why am I putting a opening bracket there? Subnet in subnet. Okay, cool. So the name would be, so here in this case, let's reference the primary VNet name slash subnet, name and properties, address prefix subnet prime prefix network security group, ID prime network security group, and we're gonna actually, in this case, we do need to start using the index. And the reason why we need to use the index is when the network security group resources are being created, they're being created in sequence of the subnets. So what we can do here is we can actually use the index to reference back the network security group to apply. So in this case, we do need to try to have the index in place, and what we're going to also do is this is the network security group, and we want to declare there should be a service endpoint declaration here, which doesn't appear to. What I'm gonna do actually is, because I know that in my app subnets, I want to have the SQL and the web, that have the SQL service endpoint available. So what I'm gonna do is, let me just subnets.name equals to app. So I'm going to, and it's starting to be strange because the IntelliSense is kind of stopped working for me. That's why I'm having a little bit of difficulty thinking about what to write. Let me see is prime location. Let's see what it's saying. Service endpoint is not allowed. So let me see. So I think it's really, this is the reason is I am not using the correct API version, which is why Bicep is complaining that service endpoint is not there. But yeah, so once I make sure that I have the right API version, everything is now showing up. So there is now the concept of service endpoint, but previously in the other version, it's not available in that context. So that's why it's not showing up earlier. All right, so now this is actually starting to work, and we can see that just as an example, if it's not showing up in my IntelliSense, probably something is still not right, but service endpoint, it's no longer showing any error. Okay, so now I'm actually going to do a little bit more. I want my application gateway to have the service endpoint for Microsoft.web. So I'm going to put another condition here. So, right, I could, this is just really an example to demonstrate that we could have additional if else, right, going on, which makes a little code a little bit unreadable, but it is still possible to do it that way. And the service should be Microsoft.web, location should be primary location. Okay. All right. So before moving on, in this context, I need the association to really be done sequentially, and versus in parallel. And so there's this concept of batch size that I need to apply, where I'm saying that the creation of the associations should be done sequentially. This is so if we don't do it sequentially, then it's going to try to apply network security group to subnets in parallel, and that's going to cause it deployment issues because the virtual network will throw an exception, right? So you need to do them one by one instead of in parallel. So that we are explicit here with that batch size of one. I think that this is looking good, and I will need to do the association for my other VNets DR. I'm just seeing if DR, everything else should be fine. Okay. And that should be it. So what we've done is we've declared variables of our subnet, and we can keep adding our subnets, and they will be automatically created. And in terms of network security groups, security rules, there could be specific ones down the road, which we'll just kind of copy and paste from here, and then reuse and apply them on the appropriate security network security group. There could be additional modifications we need to make to service endpoints, additional to other subnets. Everything is as code, and so there's kind of no guessing because we're using Git for source control, and so this is going to be audited, and somebody's going to approve that request, right, for some of that. All right, so we will next go to deploy this Bicep and take a look at what that looks like. All right, so we are ready to deploy the Bicep file, and as we've seen here, I'm using the AZ deployment group create, which we can use the same command for ARM templates as well. We are using the deploy.bicep template file, and we are declaring our parameters, and I've declared it in PowerShell variables. So prefix is there, stack environment is there, and my home office source IP is configured, and the stack owner is configured, and so I'm ready to run the command. And let's wait for that prompt for the running to appear. And so this will take several moments, and we'll come back again when it's done. All right, so the deployment completed, succeeded. And just coming directly to the resource group, the Bicep demo resource group, we do see that we have 2 virtual networks created, and we have the network security group for both the primary and DR regions created, which is all good. So let's first of all take a look at the primary VNet, and we can go to subnet, and yep, we do see that the subnets are created. They are actually also applied to the correct network security group. So if you recall, we were using the index to do that association, to reference, and then do the association. And if we were to click on the app gateway subnet, we can see that the service endpoint has been applied, right? And so that's what we want, which is the web, and then for the app, we have the SQL service endpoint, right? So the conditions that we put in is working, and then for the DB, there's nothing, no service endpoint, so it's all good. So the next thing that we want to kind of review is let's take a look at the primary subnets and gateway application gateway a network security group, right? So we do see the allow IP ranges configured correctly, and if we go to the application specific, we because we didn't set up any of the rules, right? They're not here. So this really demonstrates and speaks to the power of um, using conditions and loops in our Bicep as we start thinking about infrastructure as code. And I hope this video presentation helped you understand that a little bit better. And thank you so much.